They led me into a windowless room, fastened a white plastic bracelet on my wrist, and calmly informed me. You are afraid of marriage. That is your diagnosis. I looked at them and couldn't believe it. Behind the door, I heard my father laughing. He said it was for my own good. At that moment, I realized that if I didn't tell my story, no one would ever believe how a family could turn love into a prison sentence. Let's start from the beginning. My father repeated one phrase my whole life. Your duty is to continue the family line. Not if you want to. Not when the time comes. Duty. Period. My childhood smelled of dust from old folders with family trees. Sunday. Lessons. Dinners, memory tests. Get the date wrong, do push-ups. Forget whose father is and what business they are in. Get a look that burns with shame. Everything was a game, but there was no right to lose. Sarah, my sister, decided not to fight. She wore the right dresses, smiled when she had to, and nodded obediently. My father beamed as if he had won the Olympics. Don't complicate things. It's easier for everyone, she said quietly to me. And I looked at her and felt cold. Easier for whom? For us or for him? I hid in the library. I read philosophy, law, texts about human autonomy. And for the first time, I heard a simple but revolutionary idea: my body and my life belong to me. Not to my father. Not to my family. To me. Then I took my first deep breath. Sarah married an approved man. She gave birth quickly. My father walked around like a man possessed. That's right. He looked at her as if she were a golden cup. And then I entered law school and saw for the first time how you can defend on paper what he had devalued all his life: boundaries. Home was becoming more and more foreign to me. The priest, the family doctor, and my father's lawyer would gather for dessert. They would sit and discuss my life as if it were a project with deadlines. I felt like an investment paper that was stuck in development. I didn't bring Alice right away. She's grown up, has her own career, and doesn't dream of a wedding and children tomorrow. And worst of all for my father, she speaks her mind. She behaved with dignity at dinner. And he passed judgment in 20 minutes. She's brave. Or just selfish. Weak for a family. My heart sank. He said it as if she were just a number on his list. After dessert, he called me to wash the dishes. In reality, it was to give me an envelope. Inside was an invitation to a private club, Thursday, 7 p.m. Meeting with the family. The girl is well-mannered. No ambitions. Discuss future plans. The menu has already been chosen. Did you just set me up on a date? I blurted out. I set you on a path, he replied coldly. On the way home, Alice was silent, then said, I won't let anyone write me into their plan. I looked at her and felt that this was the sentence I had wanted to say my whole life. At home, I put 2 pieces of paper on the table, his invitation and my study plan. 2 maps. One with someone else's arrows, the other with my boundaries. I wrote to Sarah. Are you happy? She replied instantly. Yes. I'm doing the right thing. Dad already has a plan for you too. I sat with the phone in my hands and felt like someone was choking me. She really believed that happiness equals his plan. Later, a text message came from my father. Don't let me down. Blue suit. No unnecessary topics. We have an agreement. Agreed? No. He agreed with himself. I'll go on Thursday. But not as an obedient son. I'll go with my own plan. If they like documents, so do I. And my document begins with one word: agreement. Without it, nothing will happen. Sarah and I grew up in the same house, but we felt like we were walking down different corridors. Her path was quiet and smooth, mine was narrow and littered with broken glass. She accepted the rules. I rejected them. She turned 18 and immediately got married. A man, approved by her father. A year later, a child. My father walked around as if he had won a victory, showing everyone photos of the baby. My daughter knows what duty is. Sarah sat in a champagne-colored dress, with a baby in her arms, smiling as if she believed she was happy. Maybe she really learned to believe. Maybe it was her only way to survive. And at that time, I was packing my things for the dorm. Law school. Philosophy, autonomy, human rights. For the first time, I met people for whom the word choice was not a dirty word. I read about consent, about the body as private property, about boundaries. It was like breathing oxygen for the first time after a long, stuffy basement. For my father, it looked different. In his mind, it was simple. His son was shying away from real life. Not to my face, of course, he called me a traitor to tradition. To my face, he was indulgent. You're still playing around. But his tone was like a sentence. Meanwhile, Sarah was fulfilling the plan to the maximum. Wedding, child, another pregnancy. Her father beamed, neighbors and relatives talked about blessings. She stood nearby, smiling, and in her eyes I saw something between pride and fatigue. Sometimes I wanted to run up and ask, "Is this really what you want? Or are you just afraid of ceasing to be proper?" When I came home from campus, my father would fire off a new phrase like a shotgun. "My sister has already given me an heir. What about you? Time is passing." He said it as if he were counting not the years of my life, but the postponed deadlines of a project. I was angry. And at the same time, I caught myself feeling guilty, a feeling that never went away. Maybe I really was superfluous. Maybe if I didn't give him grandchildren, all his efforts would be in vain? I hated myself for even entertaining these doubts. But they were there. They sat inside me like pebbles in my shoes, invisible, but painful. At times like these, I looked at Sarah and saw a mirror. She chose the role of the right one. I chose the role of the wrong one. And we both paid the price. Only her path led to a trap. And mine led to war. I put off introducing Alice to my family for a long time. Not because I was ashamed of her, on the contrary. I just knew she wasn't the type to play a role. She had a career, her own money, her own plans. She could look a person straight in the eye and say, "I'm not in a hurry to get married or have children." To me, that sounded like freedom. To my father, it sounded like a death sentence. It was impossible to avoid. And at some point, he put an end to it himself. "Bring your girlfriend over on Sunday. It's time to show us who you're with." I tried to joke it off, to put it off. But in our house, show always meant check. And you can't cancel a check. Alice came with a small gift, a pot with a ficus tree. "For your mother," she said sincerely. She didn't know that in our family even flowers had to be plastic perfect. My mother took the ficus with a smile that looked more like a mask. "Well, let's see if it takes root." All evening, my father kept Alice under a microscope. His questions rained down like bullets: work, views, plans. When she calmly said, "I love my job. I don't want to rush. If we have children, it will only be when we want them." Silence hung in the room. The priest coughed, as if he felt uncomfortable. Sarah stared at her plate. And her father leaned back in his chair and slowly squeezed out, "Brave. Or just selfish. A woman without children is a weak woman." I thought I felt the table shake. Alice didn't answer, just squeezed my hand under the table so hard that my fingers turned white. I felt her tense up, and it made me furious. After dinner, he called me to help with the dishes. In reality, that was always code for a private conversation. "She's not right for you," he said flatly, as if discussing a bad investment. "She's not your woman. She won't last." "That's not for you to decide," I blurted out. "You're wrong. I'm better at judging people than you are. And I won't let my son get bogged down with someone so weak." His tone was final. In those seconds, I felt not like a son, but like a project he had invested in and now demanded results from. When we got to the car, Alice was silent. In the darkness, her profile seemed stony. "Already on the road," she said quietly. "I feel like he despises me." I just nodded. I was despised too. Only in a different way. And at that moment, I realized, words are just the beginning. He won't stop. He's already looking for ways to get even deeper into our lives. After that dinner, my father changed his tactics. No more open attacks, just concern, wrapped in a beautiful package. One day he called in a voice that sounded almost friendly, and that already made me wary. "Alex, I've been thinking. Are you and your girlfriend renting a small apartment? That's not serious. I can help. I have a spacious 2-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood. I can put it in your name. And there's a job for Alice at a company I know. Stability prospects." His words sounded like an offer, but I heard the subtext. It wasn't help. It was an unsigned contract. And in the end, he said the main thing. "But you understand, it's time to think about marriage. About children." I felt everything inside me go cold. It was said in an even voice, but it sounded like an order. When I told Alice about it, she turned pale as if she had been struck. "So he wants to buy our lives?" Her voice trembled. "For me to work where he decides? And for us to have children because he wants us to?" I tried to reassure her. "We can refuse." But the words sounded weak even to me. Because somewhere deep down, I had a doubt, maybe we should accept? An apartment, a financial cushion. Life would be easier. But every cell in my body knew the price: control. We had our first fight. She yelled that I was even considering this option. I yelled that we couldn't get by on just her salary and my scholarship. We both understood, the problem wasn't money. The problem was him. A few days later, Alice came home and threw a thin, colorful brochure on the table. "Is this one of your jokes?" On the cover was a smiling woman with a round belly and the slogan, "The future begins today." The brochure for expectant mothers was in her bag among her work folders. I swore it was the first time I had seen it. We looked at each other in silence, and something sticky and cold hung in the air. It was the feeling that someone had already entered our home while we were away. I knew only one thing: my father would not stop. He had crossed the line without permission. And next time he would go even further. I thought the brochures were the limit. That he would slow down a little after that. How wrong I was. A month later, Alice and I were invited to a normal family dinner. Sarah and her husband, the priest, and a few of my father's old friends. The atmosphere was festive, even too festive. Only we didn't know what the celebration was for. In the middle of dinner, my father raised his glass. His voice sounded solemn, as if at a banquet. "Today is a special day for us. I want to congratulate Alex and Alice. They are engaged." Applause. "Hooray!" The priest was already reaching for the cross to give his blessing. I saw Alice freeze with a fork in her hand. Her eyes widened as if a bucket of ice water had been poured on her. "What?" I blurted out. My father smiled as if everything had been decided long ago. Sarah nodded, the guests applauded, and someone even raised a glass to the newlyweds. Alice slowly put her fork down on the table. I could see her fingers trembling. Then she abruptly stood up and walked out into the hallway. I rushed after her. She stood there in tears, her cheeks flushed. "How could he? This is horrible. Now everyone thinks we agreed." I felt rage boiling inside me. I returned to the hall and tried to stop my father, but he was already pouring champagne and calmly announcing, "Mom and I will discuss the details of the wedding later." His confidence was unbearable. It was as if I had been erased from the scene, leaving only his script. After dinner, at home, Alice and I argued until late at night. She cried that she couldn't take it if he interfered any further. I swore I would protect us. But my words sounded weaker than her tears. The next day, she showed me an envelope. A letter, supposedly from me, addressed to my father. I read it and felt my throat go dry. Thank you for arranging the engagement. I am happy that Alice will become part of the family. The handwriting was almost like mine. But I never wrote that. Alex. Her voice trembled. He's even faking your words. I stood there with that letter in my hands and felt the floor slipping away beneath my feet. It wasn't just pressure. It was war. After the fake engagement, Alice and I stayed away from the family for a few weeks. I thought maybe now he would back off. At least for a little while. But he didn't back off. He dug in even deeper. One day, my father called in an even, matter-of-fact tone, as if he were talking about going to the store. I made an appointment for you to see the family doctor. Just a checkup, nothing special. It's always good for young couples to make sure everything is okay with their health before having children. He said it as if everything had already been decided. As if we didn't even have the right to refuse. Alice said no at first. But the pressure was intense. It's just a checkup, he kept saying. For prevention. And we went, because it seemed that otherwise he would drag us there himself. The doctor was an old friend of my father's. He smiled too broadly and looked too intently. His questions were too personal. First the tests, then the injections. He called them vitamins. Alice agreed because she didn't want to seem ungrateful. And I stood there and felt my fists clench. A few days later, she started to feel sick. Nausea, mood swings, weakness. At 3 a.m, we sat in the kitchen. Pale, her hands shaking, she said quietly, "These aren't just vitamins." I saw fear in her eyes, and I was torn apart by helplessness. The next week, when my father went on a business trip, I rummaged through his office. And there I found what finished me off completely. A contract. An official document. Birth program. In the participants column were my name and her name. I sat there with that paper in my hands and felt a cold sweat break out. He had signed the agreement for us. In his plans, we weren't even people, just a project. And that's when a new fear arose in me. Not for myself. For her. I hoped that Sarah would support me at least a little. She saw how everything was arranged. She knew that her father was coming into our lives as if they belonged to him. I went to her house and laid everything out, as if in confession, the brochures, the engagement, the doctor, the contract. I spoke quickly, breaking off, afraid that if I stopped, I would simply suffocate. She listened silently. She stroked the child's back, rocking him, as if my words were just noise. When I finished, she looked at me calmly and said, "Alex, you're exaggerating. You always exaggerate." It was like being slapped in the face. He forged my signature. He's interfering in our lives. I almost shouted. Sarah just shook her head. I'm happy. I have a husband, children. My father is proud of me. This is real life. And you just don't want to do your duty. At that moment, I felt like I had lost her. Not my sister, but a person who could have been an ally. She didn't just live by his rules, she accepted them, breathed them, and called them love. I was about to leave when she suddenly disappeared into another room and returned with some papers. She placed them on the table in front of me. Here. Your statements. You signed them. I looked at them and almost dropped them. They were the same forms from the hospital. They had my signature on them. Only I never did that. Sarah, this is a forgery. I looked into her eyes, confused. She shrugged. I saw you sign them. You must have forgotten. And then I noticed her fingers involuntarily clenching the bracelet on her wrist. She looked away and added in an ear whisper. The mortgage on the house is for another 3 years. You don't understand. Her eyes were empty. Not my sister, another witness against me. I left her house feeling completely alone. After I found the contract in my office, I didn't sleep for several nights. I made copies of the paper and looked closely at the signature. The lines were different. Some were written with a ballpoint pen, some with a gel pen. It looked like they had been added in a hurry. That same week, I got a call from an unknown number. Come alone. Without Alice. We'll discuss the details. The voice was unfamiliar, but I sensed a familiar coldness in it. It was a trap, but at the time I didn't know how deep it was. It all started as a normal family dinner. My father invited us over on Sunday. I didn't want to go, but Alice said, "If we don't come, it will look like we're running away." When we arrived, I was struck by the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the priest sitting at the table. Next to him was my father's lawyer. The doctor was there too. Sarah and her husband. Everyone looked serious, solemn. The atmosphere was like a court hearing, only without the robes. My father raised his glass, his voice sounding overly formal. "We are gathered here to discuss Alex's future." I squeezed Alice's hand. She turned so pale that it seemed she was about to faint. During lunch, the doctor approached us with a small tray. There were syringes on it. "These are just vitamins for strength," he said in an even tone. I moved away, but two family friends had already stood up to restrain us. Alice screamed, knocked the tray over, and glass and metal rolled across the floor. Panic broke out in the room. The lawyer calmly took out a folder with papers and announced, as if it had been decided long ago, "Due to Alex's psychological instability, his father is filing for temporary custody." "Are you out of your minds?" I shouted. But my words hung in the air, and their calm faces only emphasized that my reaction was proof that they were right. The last thing I remember is someone's hand on my shoulder, a sharp prick, and darkness. I opened my eyes and was no longer at home. A hard bed with white sheets. A metal bedside table. A plastic bracelet with my name on my wrist. I slowly raised my head and saw a note on the nightstand. "The patient suffers from marital obsession. Isolation is recommended." Everything inside me went cold. It wasn't just a family dinner. It was a verdict. I lay in a sterile ward and didn't understand how much time had passed. Hours? Days? There was no morning or evening here. The lamp always shone the same, a white, harsh light that hurt my eyes. Cold, like hospital metal. The door opened and he walked in. The same family friend. The doctor who had smiled at the syringes back then. Now he spoke in an even voice, like a lecturer. "Alex, your problem is obvious. You're afraid of growing up. Refusing to get married is a symptom. But we'll help you." He put a thick folder on the table. I opened it and almost choked. A photo of Alice in a wedding dress, as if we were really preparing for the ceremony. A diary with my name on it where I wrote about the fear of responsibility. Papers with my signatures, where I supposedly agreed to treatment. "This isn't mine," I whispered. "It's all fake. You just don't remember," he replied calmly. "It happens." His voice was steady, but every word stuck in my head. And suddenly I felt a cold despair rising inside me. If they control the documents, photos, witnesses, what is left for me? My word against their machine. And words are worthless here. In the evening, the door opened again. A young nurse brought dinner into the room. I wasn't expecting anything, but he leaned over as if to adjust the blanket and whispered, "Others have brought you here before. You're not the first." I froze. Our eyes met for just a second. His gaze was sharp, genuine, and then he straightened up and walked away as if nothing had happened. I lay in the dark with my eyes open, feeling my heart beating louder than my own thoughts. This is not just a family quarrel. It's a system. Well-developed, cold. And it's been working for a long time. I realized one thing: if I fought them head-on, they would win. They had documents, witnesses, forgeries. I had only the truth. And the truth here was worth less than a signature on a fake form. So I started to play along. During the morning checkup, I looked the doctor straight in the eye, nodded, and obediently answered his questions. In group therapy, I spoke in the same even tone. Yes, I was afraid of my family. But now I understand. I want children. I want to continue the family line. He nodded with satisfaction and wrote in his papers as if I were making progress. When the nurse brought books or brochures, I deliberately left them open on the pages about pregnancy and underlined the lines. In the evening, I pretended to read them carefully. In conversations with the staff, I casually dropped phrases like, "I dream of becoming a good father," or "I realize that there is strength in family." Inside, I was turning with disgust. But on the outside, I played the role of a model patient. Once, I caught the eye of that same young nurse. He saw that I was pretending. He winked subtly. It was our silent alliance. He was the witness, I was the player. I endured. Time dragged on like a sticky fog. Because I knew, soon there would be a custody hearing. If they declared me unstable, my father would gain control over my entire life. If I showed progress, there was a chance they would release me. And then, once I was free, I would be able to fight for real. When they told me the date of my release, the day of the court hearing, I smiled sincerely for the first time. The game was moving to a new level. The day of the hearing. I sat next to my lawyer and looked at my father. He looked confident, almost festive, an expensive suit, straight posture, a slight smile. He sat as if he had come to receive an award, not to sue his own son. His lawyer laid out folders in front of him with the movements of a man who was already savoring victory. The judge opened the hearing. And immediately a flood of evidence poured out, forged statements with my signature, certificates from a doctor friend, photos of Alice in a wedding dress, as if we were preparing for the ceremony. And also, testimony, where she writes on my behalf that she is afraid of me. I looked at these papers and felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. It wasn't just a lie. It was a wall, a barrier that couldn't be broken through with a single cry. My lawyer stood up. There was no tremor in her voice. She called the young nurse. He swore an oath and said bluntly, I was being held in the clinic without cause, given injections without explanation. His words were quiet, but in the courtroom, they sounded like an explosion. Then she showed the financial documents, my father's schemes, his participation in the Family Heirs program, where beautiful words hid money and control. The room fell silent. For the first time, I saw my father clench his jaw slightly. He leaned toward the microphone and said coldly, My son is simply afraid of responsibility. He has always run away from it. And now he is inventing conspiracies so as not to give himself up. The judge listened attentively, looked through the documents, and made notes. I could see him hesitating. The forgeries were well done, and the story made logical sense. But then he stopped at one of the cases and read aloud. Private institution Solis Medical. Detention of a patient for 48 hours without proper informed consent. This is unacceptable. This phrase broke through the wall. A murmur went through the courtroom. My parents' lawyer pressed his lips together. When I was given the floor, I stood up. My knees were shaking, but my voice was firm. They have all the signatures, all the certificates. I have only the truth. They want to make me a patient so they can take my life. But I am not sick. I just don't want others to control my body and my future. The courtroom fell silent. The judge looked at me for a long time. His gaze was heavy, and every second of that silence weighed on my chest. He would go one way or the other. And everything depended on this decision. After several hours of tension, the judge finally announced his decision. The guardianship is denied. I wanted to breathe a sigh of relief. But those words did not sound like victory. My father remained free. Influential, with connections, with a bunch of people who believed him more than me. In the hallway, Sarah approached me with the children. She looked at me as if I had betrayed the family. They need to know the truth, she said quietly. You have to explain to them that Grandpa is doing the right thing. I shook my head. Her eyes shone with the same resignation I had seen for years. And I realized that I couldn't save her. A few days later, I received the news. The young nurse who had testified at the hearing had been fired. Unprofessional behavior, the report said. I met him at a cheap coffee shop. He sat there, clutching his cup as if it could save him from the cold. I knew it would happen, he said. But keeping quiet was worse. I helped him find another job. It was a small thing, but important to me. I wanted to prove to at least someone that he was not alone. One evening, I received an anonymous letter. Inside were printouts of correspondence. My father and several respected businessmen were discussing dynastic alliances in a private club. There was no crime involved, but it was worse, a cynical price tag on children, on marriages, on life. The correspondence ended up in the press and on social media. And for the first time, his name began to be spoken with shame. I was no saint. There was a moment when I almost broke. In the midst of the legal wrangling, I was offered a settlement. If I signed it, my father would officially have no power over me, but I would be obliged to cooperate and keep my mouth shut. My hands were shaking as I held the pen. I thought about Alice, about her exhaustion, about how this could save her from another round of hell. I almost signed it. But at the last second, I pushed the papers away. Because I realized it would be a victory on their terms. Several months passed. I started working with organizations that fight against forced marriage and parenthood. I told my story, helped others gather evidence, testified in court. And every time I saw in someone's eyes the same helplessness that I once felt, I knew I was doing the right thing. One evening, I received a letter from my niece. Her handwriting was uneven, childish. I don't want to be like Mom. I want to be like you. I sat with this letter in my hands and felt a strange combination of pain and hope. Pain, because I knew how deeply my father had ingrained a system of obedience in our family. Hope, because perhaps she would be the first to break free without a fight. My victory was bitter. But if at least one new generation learns to say no, then it was not in vain.